Okay, so I'm going to go through and go over these questions that y'all worked on Friday, um, in hopes that you will learn how to eliminate certain answers and identify the ways to pick the correct answer. And this will help you on the test, the part of the test that you'll be completing on Wednesday. So that's the purpose of going through this. So you should have read the text on Friday, and you can see I didn't underline a whole lot, and I actually didn't even make a lot of notes out to the side when I went through this text, which I've said that it can depend on what you're doing, will depend on how many annotations you'll have to have. Okay, so the first question says, what does the author do in the first paragraph to indicate his point of view? So one thing you need to know is, although you have just read this text, you will need to go back to the first paragraph, and you need to know that we're looking for a point of view, which is the same, and you'll see this word later, is the same thing as the author's claim. So what are they trying to argue? What do they want the reader to believe? Reader to believe. Even if the reader doesn't believe it or they disagree with it, what are they wanting the reader to believe? So A says he states that making decisions is difficult and that the wrong decisions can have consequences for many people. So I want you to pick up on keywords. We have decisions, or making decisions, and then we have wrong decisions, and then we have consequences. When I look back at the text, those are words that I notice a lot. I see the word, making decisions. Here's decisions again, consequences, decisions, decision-making skills. So I should notice that repetition, and see that there's going to be a connection, that there's something about decisions, there's going to be some connection with consequences. So back to option A, we had the word decisions, and consequences. B says he makes the reader feel confident in the choices they make. There's nothing in there about being confident. He asks the reader the question about the choices they made. There is one question here, no, two questions at the end, but that is not connecting with their point of view, and those are not questions that are asking about the decisions that have been made. So that's not going to be correct either. He explains how he always makes the best choices and how he, well, right here, this should be an indicator because in nowhere does he discuss himself. So you are then left with the correct answer of A. All right, number 2. How does the author present key ideas in paragraph 5? To answer this, you should have gone to paragraph 5. And key ideas, that goes back to like the points he is making. Which should connect with all the way back to the claim. And we know that we are looking for decision making, decisions, and consequences. Those are our keywords we're going to be looking for. All right, so looking at paragraph 5. Paragraph 5 is the section that focuses on choices that teenagers make. They have to decide if they want to be popular or unpopular. And even down here at the bottom, it talks about therefore in their minds. The choice is simply between being popular and not being popular. It focuses on the consequences that they may have to face and the choices that they have to make. All right, so how does he present his key ideas? Does he emphasize the lack of reading skills? They mentioned that they have to read a newspaper article, but it's nothing about reading skills and the lack of reading skills. So that would make that one incorrect. He explains what needs to be done to help teenagers make correct choices. He doesn't give advice on what to do to help them make correct choices. He gives examples of the poor choices teenagers make and the reason why they make them. All right, so right here we have poor choices to smoke, to drink, to use drugs, and the reasons why is because they may think it makes them popular, unpopular. And then they even give an exact example. This is an exact example of what can happen if they make those poor choices. So we know that one's wrong. Let's go ahead and stick with that because we have choices and we have why, which would be popular and unpopular. All right, he supports the idea that adults should continue making decisions for teenagers. Nowhere does he talk about that adults need to make these choices. He's actually emphasizing that this is when they have to make the choices on their own. All right. Question number 3 was the most missed question in all of the classes. So it says, which statement best expresses the author's claim or point of view? Claim, point of view. You should see a connection with question 1. Question 1 referred to the author's point of view and the author's claim. Now, this only referenced the first paragraph, but you should know that the claim and the point of view is usually pointed out in the first paragraph. So when we're looking at this, we know we're looking for keywords. We're looking for decisions and consequences. So let's see, our choices have no impact on the lives of those around us. Well, nowhere does that have to do with decisions and consequences. Making choices is easy, but dealing with consequences is difficult. So that does include choices and consequences, so we can hang on to it. The result of our choices are more important than the actual choices we make. So this does not include decisions, and there's not any opinionated words about more important. So that one would be wrong because of that. There's a close connection between our choices and the results we face from these choices. Okay, so let's look at this one closely. So we have the word choices, but we don't have the word consequences, but we have the word results, which we should know that results in this situation are the same thing as our consequences. So we have choices and we have results, we have consequences. So now we're stuck with B and D. So B says making choices is easy, but dealing with the consequences is difficult. Here we have this opinion word. Nowhere do they talk about what is easy. They are just stating the facts. So that is going to make D the correct answer here. Remember, this was the most missed question. So if you missed it, hopefully this has explained to you why. Okay, so then question 4 was part B. You had to find evidence that supports it. Now remember, we are looking for choices. And I'm going to put results / consequences. Because we know that we are looking for the consequences are the results of our choices, but we might be looking more for the word results now instead of consequences. Okay, so remember, we're looking for results, choices, consequences, and we're looking for evidence that supports that. A says it may help to have knowledge of previous similar situations and what decisions were made in those situations. This is focusing on situations. It does mention decisions, but it doesn't mention consequences. We're not looking at situations, we're thinking about consequences. So that would be wrong. Adults control the TV shows and movies that the children are allowed to view, and adults even control the friends with whom young children can play with. This is only about adults making decisions, and that does not include the overall claim that choices impact our consequences. Perhaps one of the reasons certain pieces of literature have universal appeal for decades is that literature presents choices most people will face at some time in their lives. Okay, we have choices, but there's nothing about the results or the consequences. D, Socrates had to decide, he had to make a choice, whether he would accept exile, thus accepting that the charges against him were true, or accept the death verdict of the jury to prove that he thought the jury was wrong. Okay, so this is worded differently, and it's actually backwards because this is the consequence he has to accept if he made the choice that the charges were true, or he had to accept the death verdict, which would be the consequence, if he chose that the jury was wrong. So this was worded backwards because it's mentions the consequence, and then it mentions the choice. And here we have the consequence and then the choice. So I know that that made it a little bit harder, the fact that it was worded backwards, but you have to keep in mind that it's not always going to be straightforward. It's going to be a little tricky sometimes, and you really got to focus on the word choices. All right, question 5. According to the author, the lack of positive choices by teens is related to, if you go back to the section that was about choices teens make, twice it talks about being popular and unpopular. So that should be what you're looking for. So it's not going to do with parenting skills. Let's keep popular right there. It's not going to do with the amount of role models. Now, in one class, I've had some people say that the decisions that their peers are making. Now, the decisions that their peers are making could lead them to being popular or unpopular. But when you look at these two, this one is more closely connected with the text. So that is why B is going to be the correct answer there. All right, moving on to question 6. Which statement best supports the reasoning presented in paragraph 3? So in order to answer this, you should have gone to paragraph 3. Paragraph 3 talks about how adults impact the decisions that children will make, and then about how children end up making their own choices. So they have to have that responsibility. So kids make choices. Okay, and then it says they quickly learn that the decisions may carry consequences. Again, we're still focusing on decisions, consequences. And you should hopefully have noticed this repetition of words, decisions, and consequences all throughout the text. So here, the kids, if they learn to ignore the rules about playing with fire, they may learn about getting burned. And then at this early age, the choices are few and the consequences of wrong decisions tend to be clear. But again, this is about the kids making the choices and the outcomes that come from that. All right, so which statement best supports the reasoning presented in paragraph 3? It is not about adults not allowing them to make decisions. It's not about children having supporting parents. Doesn't mention that at all. Does it mention that young children quickly learn the consequences? Yes, they quickly learn that if you play with fire, you're going to get burned. If you don't follow the rules, you're likely to get hurt. Children do not have the ability to learn from their mistakes. It never mentions anything about their abilities. So C would be the correct answer there. Question 7. Which piece of evidence from the text best develops the idea that bad choices tend to have negative consequences? And here we're still following this concept of choices and consequences, and we're connecting bad choices with negative consequences. All right. As children grow older, the choices become more numerous, and sometimes the results of decisions are not so easy to predict. This does mention choices and the results, but it's about whether they're easy to predict or not. That's not the overall idea. The overall idea is that bad choices have negative consequences. B, so this is wrong. B, one must realize that every decision carries its own consequences, both for oneself and for others as well as for others. So here we have our decisions and our consequences. They may think that the choices are clear, go along with the crowd and be popular, or refuse and be unpopular. That doesn't mention that negative decisions can have negative consequences. Which here, when we have that every decision carries its own consequences, this is meaning that negative ones will have negative consequences. So this is going to be incorrect because it doesn't mention or have a connection with them being negative and negative. And then a study of history also provides valuable insight into choices and consequences. That shows a connection, but not the idea that bad choices have negative consequences. All right, question 8. Read a sentence from paragraph 3. Do they quietly do as they are told, or do they scream, cry, and protest the decisions that are imposed on them? So this is referring back to children. That's what paragraph 3 was about. It would not have hurt to look back at that paragraph to really see the context of the word. Okay. Which word best replaces the word imposed in the sentence? So if you have no clue what imposed means, we need to look at context clues. And we have the words scream and cry and protest. Those would all be considered as negative words. So we should know that when we're looking for our answer options, we're looking for a negative word. So we have forced, provided, accepted, and made. Well, we know provided and accepted are not negative words. Now we get stuck between made and forced. So we have pretty definite words here. Like these are more descriptive: scream, cry, protest. So when you look between forced and made, you should see that forced is a more vivid word to have used there. And we're looking for the more extreme of the negative words. All right, 2 left. Question 9. We are focusing on the concept of the word ostracize, which very easily could have been a new word for you. So first, let's find the word ostracized right here. All right, it says, which phrase from the sentence provides the best context for understanding the meaning of the word ostracize? So this was a long sentence, but I wanted to go ahead and include all of it so that you had the whole context of the word. But the main things you need to look at are the words here: teased and labeled the teacher's pet. Okay, again, are these positive or negative? And these would be associated as negative words. So we want to look for words that have a negative idea with them. So we have A, targets of unkind remarks and actions. Unkind right here, that's a negative word, so we're going to keep it. Certain clothes, nothing negative. Making the best grades, no. Following the teacher's rules, no. None of those are negative. So you should have picked A. All right, and question 10. In paragraph 2, the repetition of the word dangerous serves too. Okay, when authors repeat a word, it's not, or a word that has similar meanings, there's a purpose behind it. So we have to reinforce the point being made. Reinforce means to like emphasize. So that would have been good to think about. Does it reveal the author's poetic background? No, there's nothing about poems. Does it encourage the reader to question the topic? You see the word dangerous. That's not going to make you question anything. And provide historical details of the setting. In no way does that fit. So we are left with reinforce the point being made. Keep in mind, the more often you see words repeated, those words are going to be very important when it comes to the overall concept. When you look back at the text, you should see the words consequences, decisions repeated all throughout. They give examples of consequences and decisions. So you should notice this repetition of words all connects back to the point the author is making and the claim that they have. So on Wednesday, when you take the informational test, you need to pay attention to word choice and how authors repeat certain words and certain concepts, because there's a purpose behind repeating the information that they're given.